And we have your question there. So Marty, can I have some context? Welcome to the Q&A, I suppose. I'm glad you guys are here. I'm happy to see you. And I'm actually really happy that you have this question, Marty. So this is the only question we have for today so far. And we're just going to spend about an hour talking about it. I did some surface level research on pipeline tools and software. And I also found you a couple of software systems to take a look at. And I also had an interview with one of the developers of AnchorPoint, which is a pipeline software that I think would be a good candidate for the future. It's still in beta, but I highly recommend it. So Elizabeth is here, Primon is here, Slink, Yush, Marty. And so Marty, you're the one that asked this question, and I'm going to read it out, and then I'm going to ask you, what's the context of this question? So you wanted to know, what are the tools that people using to track projects, such as Attract from Blender Foundation, Microsoft Projects, Excel? What are the pros and cons of their approach? You were thinking to use Attract on your project that you're starting, but it looks like it's going to be abandoned by the foundation. So tell me more about your context in your question.
So I'm about to do what's probably going to be an 8-minute animation, and it will consist of possibly a dozen scenes, several characters, lots of props. In the past, I've always tracked all of this stuff by using an Excel spreadsheet or Microsoft Project if there was a schedule that was important. And I was just wondering if there was anything specific to an animation pipeline that would be easier to use. So I went and looked at Attract, and then discovered the blog entry from a couple of days ago where they said they're going to give up on it. And the tool that they're going to replace it with is far too much overkill for a small project like mine. So I was just curious what people are doing and what they're thinking of doing in the future.
All right, cool. Well, I've been asking the same question lately with my own pipeline. From last week, you remember that question, like how I can improve my pipeline, and the answer that I gave. It's right up connected to that. So what I'm going to do to try kind of give you an answer of what people are using and things like that is take a look at 5 different workflow techniques and their requirements and needs, which I did a quick surface level investigation, and some history, I suppose. And then I'm going to show you a little bit about Shotgun, Gitflow, Perforce, and Kitsu. Those are the ones that are commercially used and the most typical that I know of. Shotgun is now owned by ShotGrid, by Autodesk actually. Then there's the ones that I talk to, which is AnchorPoint, which is connected in with Git. And others, the one that you mentioned, Attract, and other alternatives that people use like ProofHub, Zoho, Replicon, things like that. So basically, first things first is your project. What are your requirements?
Well, I basically need to track. I may be farming out some of the production work, and so I need to track states of resources, states of assets, states of shots, pretty much everything you track when you track an animation.
All right. Is it time sensitive, or is it just mostly production sensitive, pipeline sensitive?
It's mostly production sensitive right now, so I'm not that interested in scheduling software, and I would probably use Microsoft Project unless there's something specific, because I've used that for the last 20 years.
All right. So I guess you know how it works. Okay. Well, have you heard of Gitflow?
I have. It's yet another way of doing workflow for basically production software products. It's a pretty good workflow. It's basically the same workflow that's in the best practices book.
Yeah, mainly because it fits quite down into a work breakdown structure and a product breakdown structure. And it also can fit inside a program evaluation or review technique. So basically, these techniques, back in history when factories were coming out, things are really interesting with the production lines. Lots of people started using Gantt charts from 1917 or even earlier, where they developed like a time tracking system with timelines of like this needs to be done in this time, and then this needs to be done and overlaps with this time. And over time, they just work on this for so amount of times to get the job done. So that's a Gantt chart. I've used Gantt charts or tried to use it for work, but I couldn't, mainly because my work, you can't just say, hey, I'm going to model a character for 5 hours and it's going to be finished. Maybe there's going to be some client revisions, maybe there's going to be some feedback or bounce back, or maybe the animation's a lot more complex than I expected, so I can't just sit there and say, hey, it's going to take 7 hours to animate, when in reality it's going to take 14. And then the next step that is like for sales and things is a logic network based production pipeline, which is where you have tasks and you schedule them with milestones and critical paths of a project. So for example, first you meet the producer, and then you meet with the director, and then you got to do this and work on that, and each of them work on their dependencies with the timescales and workflows and things like that. It's kind of like a delegation system for project management, and that's also quite typical. You can find like work that it's very tried and true, but it's also about delegation too. It shows activity and logical precedence that follows another activity. So for example, one person does this and then he passes that thing on to the next person. That person takes the thing and does this, and so forth. So it's kind of like a pipeline workflow. Then you have the PERT chart, Program Evaluation and Review Technique. So it's like it involves completing a given project. So you have an entire project, and each task is identified to a minimum time. So this is similar to what I use concerning points and things like that. Oh, I should change the name of the Q&A. Seems like it doesn't update the titles very well. Alright, let me just reload the stream. Q&A and critique. Thanks, JKR, for the comment on Erindale.xyz Discord server. There we go. Let's see if the title refreshes. Nope. I may need to restart the stream. Damn it. Oh well, we'll change it when we're finished. Okay, so it's basically a PERT chart is where you have points and hours and you evaluate your project. And then you have your product breakdown structure and worked breakdown structure. So I guess you have an elephant and you need to know how to eat it. So with an elephant, you can't eat it in one bite. I know it's not a very good phrase, but that's the metaphor. But so how do you eat an elephant? So one of them is, okay, so you have the entire elephant, or you have a pipeline, a workflow. You got to eat many elephants. So you can divide your system up into pieces, and each piece, so for example, okay, I need to eat the leg. So you got to figure out, okay, so how do I chop off the leg? Yeah, this is kind of a violent metaphor. But basically, you need to like, you have a big picture or a big pie instead of an elephant, and you need to chop it up into smaller pieces before you can put it inside and grab it with a fork and eat it nice and comfortably. So project management is basically a system that helps you have a general overview of what is the big picture and then the small picture. So why do you use Microsoft projects?
Mostly because I have a copy of it, and I've spent years and years developing software using it as a planning tool, and so it's got a workflow that's basically a combination of PERT charts and work breakdown structures that I use.
Okay.
Professionally, when you're managing software people, one of the things you want to learn is how accurately a given individual predicts their own workload. And with modern versions of project, you keep track of estimates versus actuals. And so you can start to develop factors like, well, okay, Bill says it's going to take 5 hours. I multiply that by 3 because he's always that slow. Not so important to this project, but managing large software development projects, it was pretty useful.
That's good. Yeah, that's true. So I guess I have another document that I loaded up here inside of search pipeline core requirements. So with my meeting with the developer from Anchor Point, so let me just give you a link of what is Anchor Point, which is, I guess, we take a look at corepoint.app. So I talked with this guy on Tuesday. He was really cool. He was super friendly. He wanted to get my feedback. They have a Discord server, and they're developing a software, and some people are using it in a pipeline for visual effects, game development, film and animation, and it ties inside Blender quite nicely, generating thumbnails and such. And it's very customizable and plugs into Gitflow, but it's kind of like a hassle-free system, Gitflow. So it has version control. That's the Gitflow that you have in mind, with branches and like reverting files. It shows who's working on what. It has time tracking and versioning for all the files, and it just with a very flexible asset management system where you download only what you need, things like that. So it's quite good. So it's kind of like an organizing tool and project management tool that you can use in the future, and its beta version is actually quite decent. So it was cool to talk with him because we discussed, okay, my current system and what I need, right? So when we go back to your question of like, what do we need? Well, what do people use, and what are the pros and cons? And how do you track these projects? What are the requirements, I suppose? And can you do it with a Microsoft project? But my criteria for a good project management pipeline in the future, talking with him, was we need easy versioning of files, hassle-free file storage so that people can connect to the files and synchronize them, because these days teams are becoming a lot more international. File structures are a lot more online and international as well between multiple computers. There is no internal networking as much as it used to be. So these things need to be easy to set up, easy to sync to, and easy to commit to. So easy to give files to. And I needed them to be cross-platform. They're working on a Linux version right now, Anchor Point. But they already have a Windows and Mac. And it needs to tie into workflow systems that I mentioned just earlier, like entire project or pipeline-based breakdowns of how things are. Go back to my other notes. Here they are. Based into PERT charts or logic networks, or a work breakdown structure, or a project or product breakdown structure, or program evaluation and review techniques, things like that. So with that, I need it to be customizable, have overviews, metrics for progress, and team assignment. That notifies people what they need to do, that they can filter their tasks and focus on what they need to do. That has a map of the things that they need to use to work, and also an ability to also get some metrics. So I use G Sheets and Trello, which I guess is similar to what you have with Microsoft projects, where you have like a system of dashboards that you can create, a system of logs or trackers with columns and rows to track your and represent what a shot is with over multiple files and folders. Anchor Point is working on that system right now, and there are others out there. So, but my biggest problem is, okay, so we're all talking about these cards and things. Does anyone here know what a Kanban is, basically? Or have you heard of Scrum, Agile, any of those systems?
Yes.
Yeah, can you tell me about it?
Huh? Software developer, so.
All right, so tell me about it. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, well, I mean, in simple terms, like, Kanban usually gives you like what we call swim lanes. So like, not started, in progress, complete, for example. So you can have a bunch of tasks like, you know, mix the pie mix, create the crust, bake the pie, to keep on your analogy, and then you can assign those to different people, and when they start on them, yeah, exactly, here to do, doing, you drag it into, all right, somebody's working on this. Typically, as you mentioned, Marty, it does have your estimated and your actuals, so you can keep track of that as well. And it's a good way to communicate, because the creator can come in here and say, hey, you know, I've got a problem. You can answer it. It's visible for everyone, or this is taking a little longer than I expected. And so you have all of that communication visible, and, you know, depending on the tool. But it's really a good visual way to help you keep track of everything. Versus, you know, if you're talking Scrum, that typically runs what we call sprints, sometimes bagels, which is a period of, you know, whatever, it can be anything, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, where you expect a piece to be completed and ready for production within that time frame.
And Marty, you mentioned you worked at Microsoft as well, right?
Yeah, I spent 2 years working on a very large project with a couple hundred people, and of course, at Microsoft, you use Agile and all of its related buzzwords badly.
Basically, in layman's terms, yes, like you get a whole bunch of things that you need to do in a set amount of time and you focus on doing them. That's basically what it is. And each thing that needs to be done is kind of like a piece of paper with a title and some notes of how to do it, pretty much. I use those systems as well in a very primitive sense, I guess. And how you tie that into a visual effects project is either using the Kanban is basically just like column with cards. It's like a wall with a couple of lines and a post-it notes on that wall. Some of them are in progress, some of them are queued, some of them need to be done, and some of them are done, so that you can communicate without needing to talk to your manager to tell them what you're doing. And that's cool. So with these systems, okay, so you got to think about, okay, you have your project, right? And you have your entire structure, and you have your folders, and then you have your shots, and then you have the status of the shots, if it's in progress, if there's a problem that needs to be fixed, if it's approved, etc. Then you have like how long the people working on the project, and then you can have also, for example, like what type of job is it, who are the people working on it, if the animation is done or not, or if it's in compositing. And then you can even like review the frames, etc., or their status, and you can download that project and sync that file to the system. So you got to think, okay, so which software helps me to 1, share files, 2, talk to people, 3, track metrics, 4, track the progress of the files, 5, understand basically the status of the files, information about the files. And then finally, after that, 6, versioning, so that you have a history. If someone makes a mistake, can you go back? So with your Microsoft project system, Marty, can you do versioning?
No, that's always done externally. At Microsoft, we used a version of Microsoft proprietary version of Perforce. Elsewhere, I've used various Git workflows. And then you have to track that into the project system using Git workflows. We use something like Jenkins or its equivalent, where check-ins triggered scripts to do things for you.
Wow. It sounds really complex for the type of size of project you have, right?
Yeah, this is too much, far too much for this small eight minute video. This is something we use when we have 300 people in 3 locations, and we're trying to build a device. So we have, thousands of components.
Impressive. Yeah, that's something that's quite interesting. So yeah, I guess you mentioned Perforce, and also Belinda has mentioned Kitsu, and we've all had a look at Gitflow, and there's the typical shotgun workflow that's been used very heavily in the industry. which is now called ShotGrid. So all of those systems, basically, GitFlow is used for software development, using Azure DevOps, which is from Microsoft, which actually has for private repositories, I highly recommend. The guy from Anchor Point, he mentioned it to me and I had a look, and sure enough, you can have 5 people on your team using the repository privately without any limits. So you can like commit to LFS and you commit to like any size data or as many commits as you need, unlimited, using Azure DevOps as your private repository. So that's a good tip. GitHub has 2 gig LFS limits per file, and your projects are about 15 gigs max per project. GitLab also has similar limits, and most other Git solutions have like limits in their data. So if you want unlimited 5-person repositories for free, use Azure DevOps. Why not while it's still free? But GitFlow, that's so people use that to develop that, and they use Shotgun, which is well for like shots and work this through. I don't know, I haven't used it before. All of these are paid, and some of them are expensive. Kitsu is mentioned to be, by CG Wire, is mentioned to be open source, but it's not free. So it has a price as well. But the workflows are essentially all the same, or all very similar, depending on your requirements. And in general, you can use something like Anchor Point, which is free for now, but in the future will have a subscription model. Others, you can use other systems like Zoho. Zoho generally has free systems that you can use as well. You can use Microsoft Google Drive or whatever, but as long as your workflow is clear, you can find out which one works best for you, I suppose. So what would you like to do? How would you like to minimize your system? From the ground up, Marty.
Well, for this project, what I was thinking of is to use the approach, the workflow, where the final production video is the master. So each shot has a place in that workflow, and then there's a whole set of criteria for each shot approval until you actually have one that the director has approved.
Which is like a pull request.
Yeah, like a pull request. And then for resources, I'm kind of not sure how to map resources like props into shots yet. I'm a little lost on how best to do that given what tools are available.
All right. So for example, with if we take a look at like a software like Anchor Point, you have a folder with assets, and inside the assets you have like inside the props folder you have, for example, this gun. This gun has a texture folder, subfolder with its textures. That's basically the general idea, and inside of it you have a status of that particular prop. You can download and apply a status. So the cool thing about like this system here is like, okay, so a bit like if you're using GitFlow, then you could say, okay, use it's set up by folder structure. So in my projects, for example, one of my projects has a typical folder structure for everyone, and all of the projects are very similar. So I have like a default project, which would be built off, so for example, a documents folder, a pictures folder, a scenes folder, a videos folder, an audio folder. Inside the pictures folder, I would have my textures separate. I have a folder called text. That's where I keep my textures. I have a reference folder, progress folder, the brief from the client. And in my scenes folder, I have my general structure of like, which folder is the animatic branch, which is there's kind of like branches, I suppose, the conceptual branch, the modeling branch, the animation branch, the rendering branch of the general project. So each, if I go into like a more mature project, Here I have it in by numbers, so in my animation I have it per shot, and then in each shot I have my versions. So I'm not using an actual git flow on this, but I am using versioning just with numbers. But it's bare bones, right? Bare bones is basically versioning is like you have a history based on a date with a number, pretty much to say this is version 1, this is version 2, this is version number 3, and so is working on version number 4, right? And that's basically it. But basically you have, if you're working in your project system over here, keeping it nice and simple, bare bones, you have a shot that is a branch, right? And you have your folder structure. So you have another branch, I guess you could say. Inside the branch, in the master trunk, you would have your subfolders of your common assets. And inside your common assets, you could have your branches of your work of those particular assets. So you got to figure out, okay, so your file structure of the general project first to understand, okay, so which files reference what files before you start thinking about the versioning. Because if you don't know what to version, then you can't version. So you got to be organized from the ground up, have a strong foundation of your folder structure. So you got to have your project nice and clear. You got to have your idea of what your scenes are, what are your shots, what are your assets, and inside your assets you got to think, okay, where are your textures stored? If you have a lot of 2D work, so I usually have a lot of 2D work in mind, so I keep my textures separate, and so that I can have concepts and design and anything else that I need in that particular project. I like to keep my documents separate, and I also keep my scripts separate. So I have a folder for add-ons. I have the common software, for example, a branch of Blender that I would use that everyone would be using for the render. So I have the software. I wrote Softimage, I miss it so much, sorry. And then from there I write down, I also have like the script, the rendering scripts for the batch rendering or any custom rigging scripts, whatever. In the documents I would have the actual story, I would have the logistics. This is where I manage my logistics from here. These are contracts and finances or whatever inside documents. This doesn't have to be shared with everybody, but it would be part of every single project. And then from there in the scenes, I have my concept or my animation. I also have a shot for the animatic, separate. This is kind of like where everything's together. I have my layout. My layout is like, when I have my scenes, I grab all the data from the layout and use that to render the final shots in either new scenes and the render scene. And then from there, I use my composites. So that everybody doesn't sync up all the data, I also have another folder called render pictures. And then from there, I use another folder called composites. So render pictures is kind of like the render AOVs and the data that you want to use. And this is like image sequences. And then from there, I use composites, which is kind of like the composited image sequences for the final product. And then from there, I have another folder with my video files, which are usually quite large if they're not compressed. And that would have my export, my final export. And also for my sound engineer, he would only need to access one folder where he would have the audio files. So I separate my projects into kind of like sectors of file types, and then inside the particular branch of the scene folder, this is where everybody starts working together in this area. So that my 2D artist can work here. For example, here I will also store the storyboards. But the other artists can work on their particular area. So for example, one person's working in the assets folder, working on their particular assets, either with a subfolder for the textures or inside the textures here. Yeah. So it's your choice, really. This is kind of based off Softimage project management. So quite old, but basically that's how I would sectorize the files. Once you have your file structure nice, clean, and clear, then you know how do I version it, where do I version it, and which person is going to version what. So in your shots and animation folder, you would have scene 1, shot 2, and this would be the shot folder that you'd be tracking, and in this you'd have your blend files with that particular shot. Okay, is that clear, or is it a bit weird for now? So far, does it help you understand what you need to do with the project management software that you need to look for? You still there? Alright, don't worry. Okay, so you have your file structure, and then you figure out your versioning. So you got the structure. This is the folder, and then how you're going to share this with your people is like, okay, so you're going to use a cloud data sharing system of any kind. My criteria is that it's just easy to set up and easy for people to work with. So something that a super minimal Git would work, and then from there, or even just cloud syncing like Nextcloud or Google Backup and Sync, to get the files to and from each other from this central trunk, which what I would have as a master in my local computer or in the server that I'm working with. Then I would use like headless versioning just to compare a local copy with the cloud copy, and that's about it. Or just use versioning from another software like this one, where you have a shot, you download the shot. Once it's downloaded, they start working on the shot with the footage, with the assets of per shot. Like this person, they organized it per shot, and then work from there. So, and then they go through each folder. Each folder can be versioned and subversioned through here. It's kind of like a very minimal version of a Git. So here you give you a timeline, and it shows, okay, textures were added, the VR character was added, details on the jacket were changed, and it goes through a timeline, and you can always revert or go back and review each of these changes or of these projects, and you can see what happened to this particular asset and just review this way, right? So you got your file structure, then you can understand, okay, so what can I use to version, and then from there you can like, okay, so what can I use to use granular revision and overview, and then task assignment, right? So with the Microsoft projects, you don't have file versioning and file sharing. So that's one thing you need to think about. Okay, so how I'm going to share the files, and how am I going to version the files?
Right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I think I was muted there for a while.
Okay. All right, so let's see if I can like show you guys what I talked a lot. You guys is it confusing? Is it a bit too complex, or can I make it even more simple?
It makes perfect sense to me. I do have a question when you get a break.
Yeah.
So if you look at what I just posted, I do things slightly differently in that I keep all of my models separate from my shots. And the versioning problem that I'm not sure how to solve is which model version goes with which shot version. Most of my stuff is done by successive refinement. And so I might have, very simple versions of the models that I use when I'm storyboarding or timing out. And then more sophisticated models for when I get closer to actual production rendering. And I'm not really sure how to match that, especially when different models are used, like one model is used in 3 shots and a different model is used in 2 other shots and so forth.
In this case, for example, okay, so then you have, okay, micromanagement. So this would be like your micromanagement step of your pipeline that you need to think about. So we've gone through, whoops, I'll just copy this box. Let me just zoom in. a little bit, and then you have your macro management. Macro management. Yeah, so these are the 4 columns: file structure, versioning, micromanagement, and macro management. So versioning will give you, is kind of like a history tracking. And so that files don't get overwritten. So it's not a mess. This is like, you have your house, this is how you keep it tidy with versioning. So now you have micromanagement and macro management. And you mentioned earlier that you have like a different type of pipeline where you have a global asset, but you have different versions of global assets for different versions of the pipeline. So what I do is, for example, with my project, is if I have an animatic folder, right? So here in my scene, I have an animatic folder. In the animatic, I have my animatic look div and just a bunch of things. And then I have an assets folder, or a build folder, my character folder. So I name my rigs. So for example, this is version 2. Version 1 would have been a version of the rig that's used as a proxy inside the animatic. And version 2 would be the one that I'll be using for the actual animation. And then I just iterate version 2. I keep a history, but version 1 would be my animatic version. Version 2 would be my production ready version with the materials. And that's how I will differentiate it, but it's stored in the same folder, the same subfolder of the characters. And then I have just the building characters, you know, like folders for sculpting and retopology. I don't store the sculpts inside the same folder because that's a file that's like 300 megs, right? So when I go into the animatic, I'm pulling the characters that are rig 1 and the animatic branch of my scenes, I guess you could say, and work the shots from there. But in my animation folders, I start using the actual, inside the shot, I load up the bare bones layout for a proxy for animation, and I animate with the rig 2s. And then when I'm ready, I use one of these animated shots and I use it as a render. So if you have like, micromanagement is like, so you have like pipeline codes, I guess you could say, which is where you would use a product breakdown structure. So you would kind of have the big pie and you chop it up into pieces, and then you have like a time sensitive concept of what a piece is and when you need to use the piece. So you have the uncooked pastry, and then you have the cooked pastry. So you have one folder, or you have the pie container, but you have the uncooked pastry version of the pie, and then you have a cooked pastry version of the pie. And I would have 2 separate data files for each. The uncooked pastry version is the one I'm using for my animatic, and then the cooked pastry is the one I use for the final render. And with that, you have like whole parts with a relationship, so that you can deliver them and contribute to those different parts to make it work down by using an exhaustive hierarchical tree. And that's why hierarchy is important here. So in my scenes, I have my assets. So let me just make the visual part. So I have a character. So I have a character version number 1, which is the animatic version, and number 0, which is the sculpt version or the design version. So, and then I have the animatic version, and then I have my animation version. And that is like level 1, level 2, level 0, 1, and 2. And then my shots, I only use level 2 animation characters. But in my layout, I can use level 1 characters. Yeah. And because of that, I'm using a concept of micromanagement with codification, I suppose, of what different types of assets and what state they're in, etc. So that the files are divided okay. I can't say it's very clear for everybody to work this way. It's like training your team to work in this is difficult, always. Usually keeping things super simple for that particular person this is where you start thinking about macro management. So in micromanagement, you have pipeline codes, time sensitive. You have file segregation. Yeah, time sensitive file segregation, or branches of those things. And then you have a flow, a general flow concept of how data is supposed to work in the project. And then macro management is like, okay, so who is doing what? How long? Like, are they doing it in time? How long is it taking? Who's doing what? How long is it taking? How can I let them know what to do and how to do it? That's the macro management of managing the team, making sure the whole project's advancing, that everything's working together. So when you look at your software, you think, okay, does this software help me with managing a hierarchy of data in a kind of a product breakdown structure? Is it good at evaluating and reviewing techniques with the team? That's why Kanbans are quite useful, or the point-based system with sprints. Separate the pie into pieces so that you can eat it all. Do I have a breakdown structure? Is it clear? Am I using all of these three systems along with some logical networking with time-sensitive tasks and things? Does that software provide those basic needs? Does it connect with the file structure? Right now, my biggest problem is I have these two things separate. The file structure and my versioning is separate from my micromanagement and macro management. So when you're looking for a good solution, you're looking for something that provides micromanagement and something that provides macro management, and it's connected with versioning and file structure. And this is why I like software. I mean, Perforce is the de facto. Using JITflow is kind of a concept that works with that. Azure DevOps has everything you need. It has Kanbans and workflows and Gantt charts and whatever, and it connects with your Git flow. Shotgun is a concept built around that to a degree. So all of these commercial solutions do this to some degree. And you can use other solutions as well that can help you. For example, Anchor Point, which is coming up, and a number of others that I found online as well. But I quite like Anchor Point because it's simple, to the point. It works with any Git system. So it connects with Git and then works from Git for you. And it gets rid of the headaches of like, all right, I need to commit, I need to pull, I need to revert, I need to clone, I need to merge, I need to do all of these Git terms, which is a bit too much for a basic artist who just opens up Photoshop and starts painting. So I remove that from the artist so that he can just work. And from there, I can manage, hopefully in the future, manage the team using something like this. So this is kind of like a direct competitor to Kitsu, still in development. And Kitsu has that solution. That's why the Blender Foundation is using it, because it gives them SVN or versioning with their Git flow and everything that they need, right? From CGY.
Mm-hmm.
Remove Git, Matisse dies today. Oh, JIT. There it is. So they have, it's practically like, if you can see from their screen captures, it's practically the same thing, pretty much. You have like a reviewer, you have columns and rows to show time-sensitive stuff. You have like status drop-downs and revision tools, and like a card-based system. You have the card-based system is basically more of a visual representation of what are columns and rows, moving a row to another section of the spreadsheet, which is what I have here. So this is a Kanban as well, except instead of being vertical, it is horizontal, but it is the same thing. So that's the concept, right? So Kanban is kind of like a vertical spreadsheet. So to do, doing, revision, and done, same thing. So that would be your criteria to find the right software that would get you the job done. And there you go. Well, that's my presentation, I suppose.
Very good. Thank you.
So I'm going to throw up these links so you can take a look, I suppose.
Definitely going to take a look at Anchor Point.
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, meeting him personally and hanging out in his server a little bit. This was recommended by Stev, actually, from Iodine Tutorials. You know, it's Stephen Scott, the one that does the Blender Royale and has the YouTube channel. All right, guys. He recommended it to me, and I was taking a deeper look, and I got to talk to the director directly, or one of the developers. It was nice. You know, he was really open, and he's got big plans for the software. 2022, I'm sure they're going to do a lot of great things with it. So I quite like that concept.
Do they have any thoughts to like integrate with a server farm or something so you could, you know, sure it'd be a paid service, but you could.
Yeah, they're going to have their own servers. That's their plan. But they also, it can connect to any Git, right? Any repository. If you have Git flow and if you have a repository online with SVN, then it will plug in. That's basically it. So you can just go like join a workspace, select into the GitHub project, connect to it, and configure it a little bit, and you're good to go.
All right.
So it kind of minimizes that to some degree. Other systems that you can use is like I love using Tortoise and Blender. No, sorry, on Windows, which is kind of like a integrated desktop versioning system. So, for example, let me just go to a repository here. 3D stuff, go to B for artists. So, for example, if I right click on the repository in my file folder structure, I have my fetch, my pull, my pushing, and all my JIT commands directly as a context menu. I quite like that too, because then it just feels like I'm committing to the repository as if it was a file structure built inside Windows. So my versioning and all of that and reviewing the files is directly with the Windows platform. So that's another way you can do it to kind of get that workflow. And then I update my stuff manually or things like that just to manage myself. Like here, I update this manually. A lot of extra work, but I assume if you use any system like that, then yeah, I would be doing that. So software like this one, like Anchor Point or others, it makes it a bit more automatic. Kind of bridges the 4 columns that we have here, right? Of micromanagement, macromanagement, versioning, and file structure. It kind of bridges it between the two and kind of tries to keep it all simple, but give you some flexibility. So that's a good criteria for that kind of software. If you look for like Zoho projects or something in like Azure DevOps, that can give you a nice bridge as well. Or something cheaper like Kitsu. No, Kitsu's not cheaper. DevOps is cheaper because yeah, five users for free. Good Lord, you can't beat that. Unlimited Git. So you got to work with those things and just like do your research. Which interface is the easiest to pick up? Which one gives you the least amount of hassle with your artists? Which one requires the least amount of activity from your artist? Like maybe your artist can just say, yeah, I worked on this project that I have been automatically assigned. I've finished it. So now just review, and then the software notifies you that it needs to be reviewed and you're good to go. Or smaller teams, obviously a little bit easier, but you got to think, okay, so how easy is the micromanagement? How easy is the macromanagement? How easy is it to do versioning? How untechnical should it be? And what is my file structure for the general project? So there you go. Some criteria to help you find the right one. And hopefully that answers your question, Marty. Do you have more questions about that?
No, that's good for right now. I got to digest all that. It's very good information before I come up with anything more intelligent to ask.
Oh, cool. What about the rest of you guys? What do you guys think? It's cool to see you here, Matisse. And TT. Here's another link from Quora I recommend. Quora gave a pretty nice, there's a thread that I found. It's like, what is a good project management software? And there's a whole bunch of services. Like, there are dozens of them, so many. So I recommend you check out that thread. Oh, cool. I'm glad you could come by, Matisse. Send you a capture of these 4 columns. Hopefully you found this useful. Because, yeah, I've been personally doing the research, meeting up with the anchor point just this week. All of that was super important. Good timing with your question. Because, yeah, next year I need to improve my system. So that's why I'm doing my research.
I have to go in the opposite direction. Remember that I'm working with small teams. I'm so used to projects with hundreds of people.
Yeah. I think small teams is basically just kiss it. My good friend Pers, he told me, and he drilled it into my head, that keep it simple, stupid. Kiss your project, keep it simple. If you find the solution that's the most simple, that does just what you need, that gives you the ability of the 4 basic columns, I suppose, and you're good. The more simple it is, yeah, it might allow for complications in the future, but since you're a small team, you don't need to be too complex to have a general picture. So you need like a stupid interface, a very easy way of Git. You know, like I was trying to work with my teammates using GitHub Desktop or GitHub Desktop, and we were having problems with merging branches, and it was not good. But with my other teammates, we just used free file sync, an open source solution that's synchronized with Google Backup and Sync. Just click on compare of the file, and it will show me what has changed between the cloud and my local. And people who had never used Git before understood it. These green arrows with the plus sign is like, oh, I'm adding this to the cloud. If it's blue, it's saying, oh, it's coming from the cloud. And I can choose if I want to revert back to the cloud version or go back, So here are all the extra files that I have. This is 0 kilobyte file I don't want, so ignore it. And it was super easy for them to figure out, right? Keep it simple. So things like that.
I had the good fortune at Roku of working with a user experience designer who was really very good at finding the simplest way to solve problems. I'm thinking I should hire him, but I can't afford him.
Yeah, budget's the other one, right? Yeah, I was taking a look at the prices of Kitsu, and it's like, what, $300, $400 per year? Minimum. And some of them were like $4,000 per year. It's like, whoa, wow. You got to think about it. Things like DevOps Azure is kind of like $6 per new user after 5 users per month. So 6 times 5, 12 times 6, $62. No, $72 per year per user. So it can get expensive quick the bigger your team becomes.
Mm-hmm. I have a really simple rule. If they have a button for call for demo, I can't afford it.
So it's interesting. The good thing about Anchor Point is that they have promised that there will be a free individual unlimited version. So even if you don't have your team inside Anchor Point, you can use it to manage the project yourself and just manage the rest of the project on Git. through some other Git system if you need to. So there's always solutions to different problems. This requires sitting down and doing your research and understanding what is your criteria and making sure your project file structure has a solid foundation and your pipeline is very clear from the beginning. Right. And then you can find the correct solution. Because going from the other way, here's the perfect solution for which pipeline. You can't do that. You can't just say, here's the perfect tool for you. But if it doesn't know what you are doing, the tool is going to be utterly useless. So it's kind of like and a waste of your time. But if you have your fundamentals clear, then the tool should be able to adapt to you. And that's where you find the right one. So there we go. Thanks everyone who hung out this whole time. Primon, Slink, Yush.
Thank you for your time.
Hope it was interesting, a bit more bureaucratic.
But necessary.
Yeah, and that's the important thing about 3D art is like, okay, so there's the whole business aspect of making animation and art. And there's a whole logistical aspect that many artists don't even think about or talk about when in the industry. So it's an important topic, and it's good to understand, especially if you want to like make your own business or make your own production that's more than just you. So if you want to work with people or scale and do something bigger, or even like understand how an animation studio works, these are the things that you need to learn and know to grow those things. So, yeah. But if you've already worked in software, yes, you're perfectly fine. It's pretty much the same thing, or similar. Just a lot more artistic. All right, so Slink has one question before I finish today, which is, what do I think about NPRs or non-photorealistic rendering? I love it. Short answer. Next week I'll go into a longer answer. How about that, Slink? When you're feeling a bit better, yeah? I'll do some research. Awesome. So next week, yeah, we'll talk about NPRs. And I guess we can go a bit more conceptual with it, or even more technical if you want. We'll see. Let me know. So thanks for your time. I'm going to stop the stream here, and yeah.